Hey family, welcome back to the Nona Jones Show. I am so excited about today's conversation because we're going to have a conversation that is both real and redemptive. I want to talk today about the challenges and, yes, the joys of parenting children with disabilities as well as complex medical diagnoses. Now, before we hop into this conversation, I want to offer just a few statistics. So in the United States alone, 1 in 6 children has a developmental disability. Over 3 million children live with complex medical conditions requiring ongoing care. And behind every one of those children is a parent, a warrior, who is often juggling the complexity of grief, advocating for their child, financial stress, and loneliness, feeling misunderstood, all while trying to hold their families together during a very difficult time. But here's the thing, in the middle of even that storm, there is beauty, there is strength, and there is purpose. And today's guest is someone I'm so excited to get to introduce to you because she embodies all of that and more. If you are a parent walking through this journey, or if you are the friend of someone, the family member of someone who's walking through this journey, this conversation is your invitation to breathe, to be seen, and to know that you are not alone. So let's get into it. Hey y'all, real quick, I want to make sure that you know that if you enjoy my content, if you enjoy this podcast, if you even enjoy what I share on social media or in my e-newsletters, you need to become part of my Patreon community. My Patreon community is an exclusive community that will give you access to even more content that I make available publicly. You'll get early access to my podcasts on at least a monthly basis. I'm hosting a live Q&A to recap the conversations that I'm having, and you can join at different membership tiers depending on your budget, all right? So I want you to consider joining my Patreon community because I would love to connect with you in a deeper way. All right, now back to the conversation because it's going to be good. So my guest today is not just an amazing person I'm going to introduce you to, but she's actually a friend of mine. Our children go to school together, so I get to see her in the flesh pretty regularly. And let me tell you, it was a long time before I knew the work that she does. But when I found out about her work, I immediately knew that I wanted to do everything that I could to spread the word and to build support. So let me tell you about this phenomenal woman. Her name is Abby Zachritz. She is a mother of 5. You're not going to believe this when you see her, but she has had 5 babies. She is a fierce advocate as well as a trusted voice for families who are navigating disability and complex medical challenges. And she's known as Advocacy Abby. You can find her on social media under that handle. She co-founded the Connect platform, which connects families with thousands of grants and resources for therapists and equipment and financial support. You're going to learn more about why that is so important in this conversation. And she also serves as the Director of Family Advocacy for SupportNow.org. She sits on the board of the Parent Empowerment Network, and she consults with healthcare organizations on how to better serve families with unique needs. But the thing that makes her message so powerful, in my opinion, is that it comes from a deeply personal place, her own journey of advocating for her child with a disability. She is proof that advocacy, connection, and faith can turn heartbreak into healing. Abby, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. It's fun to see you off the court because we're usually watching our boys play basketball. Yeah. So
I know we're usually on the sidelines, like cheering for our kids.
Praying hard to keep my mouth shut.
Lord, listen, because you know how I roll. When those refs don't get the call right, in my opinion, I'm like, look, I know we go to a Christian school, but God is still working on me.
That's right. That's right. We only got 2 cheeks. I said it yesterday. We only got 2 cheeks. Turn it twice.
Yes,
Come on.
only 2 cheeks, and I've turned to both. So Lord help me. But I'm so grateful that you took some time to join not only me, but everyone who's watching, everyone who's listening, because from the moment you shared your story with me, which I had no idea, from the moment you shared your story with me, I knew that I wanted to do everything that I possibly could to help get the word out about the work that you're doing. And so you have been a lifeline for so many families, but I want to start with your own story. Can you tell everyone what was the moment that your life changed, and kind of invite them into how you stepped into the journey of parenting a child with special needs?
Yeah, I'd love to. So in 2014, we actually in 2013 and before that, my husband and I lived in Fort Myers, Florida. He was a youth pastor at a church plant there, felt the calling to start a church in Gainesville, Florida. And so we moved here with 3 kids, and we had just had our 4th, actually, Wyatt, and I became quickly pregnant with our 5th child shortly after we got here. Our little surprise pregnancy. And we had just launched the church, and we had our first ever Easter church service. And we were so excited because people showed up. And when you're a church plant, anybody who doesn't know that world, it's a new church, and you're just hoping people show up. The Lord tells you to go, and you're like, I hope somebody shows up. So they did, and we were celebrating, and we had our staff meeting. And shortly thereafter, we were preparing to get my second oldest son to his preschool recital. And that's when my husband came home and he said, "Where's Wyatt?" I said, "He's in the living room." And we quickly found out he wasn't there anymore, and he had gotten into our pool and had fallen in. When that happened, we immediately called 911, jumped in, started CPR. And we had a few miracles happen while we were waiting. The fire department happened to get a call, and they were only like 3 minutes down the road. Normally they would have been 20 minutes to get to us. And so it was a bogus call. And so they were right there. They got there quickly, and they took over CPR. And I am very big and pregnant, 7 months pregnant, soaking wet, jumped into the front of the ambulance with the team that was working on my son as we drove to Shands Hospital. And I remember looking, they have a little mirror or a little window that you can look through while you're driving in the front with them, because they didn't want me in the back because they were really working aggressively on him. And I remember they'd look up and see me through there, and they had this look of fear on their faces. And I didn't know exactly what was going on with Wyatt at the time. I knew he was blue. I knew he wasn't responding when we got to him. And then when we got into the hospital, they took him into a trauma room, and they put me into a waiting room. And I literally laid on my face and began to pray and ask the Lord to save my son. And then a nurse walked in, and she said, "Your son's not doing well, and we're going to take you in to say goodbye to him." And I lost it. I was hysterical. And I thank this nurse for this, because if she didn't have this strength to kind of get me in check, I wouldn't have been allowed in the room. But she said, "You need to stop right now, or you will not be in the room." And so I stood up. I stopped immediately, because nothing was going to keep me from my baby. And they took me into the room. And I remember there was about 15 people in the room, maybe more or less. And none of them were working on him, except one guy was doing chest compressions. And when I walked in, he looked up at me and he stopped. And I later found out that's something they do to help the parent come to terms, like, we're done. And because they had already called it on Wyatt. They had already said he's not making it. He had been 40 minutes at this point, unresponsive, no heartbeat, no breathing. And so I walked in and I saw them stop, and he was blue. And I just began to cry and pray and try to pick him up. He had tons of wires on him, and just said, "Please don't stop. Please don't stop. Lord Jesus, save my baby." Like, I just was begging them, looking at them, pleading to please not stop. Then the doctor walked over, and he had been the longest running intensivist at the time. He had been there 17 years. So unfortunately, he saw this often. They had already looked at Wyatt's heart, and they saw that it wasn't beating on an EKG. So they'd already looked at it, and he wanted me to come to terms with that a little bit more. And so he said, "Show mom his heart." And so I'm sitting there with Wyatt in my hands, and I look up at this monitor, And I was so confused because I'm not a medical expert, but I saw pumping. And then I heard thump, 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 thump. And the room just erupted in motion. They flew onto my son. And I remember I spoke with the respiratory therapist after then. He's a man named Abby. He's from Kenya. He has great faith. And he said, when I came in, he felt Jesus in the room. And they all were standing and watching. And they said they had never seen it before. They literally have on Wyatt's medical records that he had a spontaneous heartbeat. They had no explanation for it after 40 minutes of being gone. And so we were ushered out of the room quickly, and they took us up to the PICU. Matter of fact, the nurse practitioner that was on the PICU floor said, they called her and said, prepare a bed for a sick baby. He's coming up. They called her back and said, never mind, the baby's passed. And then they called her again and said, never mind, the baby's back. Prepare the bed. And so that was really the beginning of our journey. I quickly learned that a lot of things weren't covered by insurance that my son needed. We were in the PICU for 52 days. And there were so many treatments that people had started telling us about, hyperbaric oxygen, stem cell therapy, intensive physical therapies, and functional neurologists, none of it which were covered by insurance. And so we began this journey, and we said, my husband at the time was a youth pastor or a church plant pastor. So if you want to talk about like the lowest income level you could get in the pastor world, we were living it. So we didn't have any resources. Like we had no savings. We had poured everything into starting the church. And so my husband was a big advocate, like the Lord is going to provide. If it's not going to hurt him, we're going to try it. And so I went on a deep dive into the world of grants, and I started finding them. And their first grant I ever found was an organization called Live Like Jake Foundation. They specifically helped children that had survived drownings. And I reached out, I applied for the grant to get my son to a functional neurologist. And they covered the entire treatment. And when that happened, a light bulb went off, and I was like, there has to be more out there.
Abby. First of all, I am trying so hard to just keep it together because I think my oldest son, TJ, was born very premature, 26 weeks. I remember delivering him, and I remember like they just whisked him away, right? Because he, at that time, back in 2010, viability, that was considered like less than 50-50, right? So they whisked him away. And I remember asking my doctor, looking at her, like, of course, we're in like the OR, and it's like all this chaos, right? Because it was so unexpected, and she has her mask on and all this stuff. And I looked at her in her eyes, and I was like, is my baby going to be okay? And I remember the look in her eyes was just, you could tell she wanted so bad to be honest based on her experience and say no. But her response was, we're going to do the best we can. And that response, because I knew what was under it, was so heartbreaking. And so I'm imagining you, because we also had a scare when he was in the NICU where we were going to lose him. They thought his bowel perforated, this whole thing. And I'm imagining you walking into that room with those 15 people standing around, and they're performative chest compressions, right? Because they're not expecting anything, but just so you see. And the absolute anguish of that moment. For families, I'm curious, because I think that's such a low moment. For families that, before we even get into the work, that are experiencing the devastation and the grief and the overwhelm of whatever the situation is, what helped you in that moment? Because I know there's like the being a mom, right? It's like, no, keep going. This is my baby. But in order to even do that, there has to be hope there, because you wouldn't ask people to continue if you accepted their diagnosis. Well, he's gone. What was it in that moment that gave you the hope to even say, no, keep going. Let me grab my baby. We're going to do something about this.
I worship a God of miracles. Like, if I didn't have someone to ask, I would have just been mourning, When and I have to lead with this because sometimes when I tell our story, people think I'm a great woman of faith, as in I'm not shaken. I'm not like, I just know the Lord's going to show up. So I just keep cool. Like when you're watching a movie and you're like, we know it's going to work out. It wasn't like that. I was a mess. And then I thought my son was dead. And that was the reality I walked into. However, I had a name I could call on. I didn't know if he was going to show up, but I just knew I had to call it. And it wasn't out of my faithfulness to God. It wasn't because I was a Christian or a pastor's wife or any of those things. It was because he is faithful time and time again that my son is alive. So like, I don't want people to ever confuse my faith with what happened. It was God's faithfulness that happened. And so, but I did have a name to call on. And if I hadn't had that name to call on, we wouldn't be here today because they wouldn't have felt the need to even look again had I not been begging and pleading and crying and praying and calling on his name. So I don't know if that answers your question, but what was the thing that kept me going? It was the fact that my God has done it before and he did it then and he'll do it again.
I think for anyone watching who is in an impossible situation, that is such an important word. It could be involving their child or their spouse or maybe their finances. It's so many different ways that you can be up against a wall and it looks like there literally is no way. And then we have to remember that we serve a God who causes streams to flow in deserts. Like we serve a God who makes quail and manna fall out of the sky, and so it gets to a place where I think what you said is so important is remembering who God, not just who God is, but who God was. Like he did this before. And the hardest part, I remember having to pray this when TJ was in the NICU and it wasn't looking good and they had rushed him back to surgery. The hardest part for me was being in a moment where I had to release him to God, like recognizing that, yes, God absolutely can. He can work a miracle. And he's also sovereign. And he's good. And I don't know how this is going to end, but I do know who God is. So I thank you for sharing that because I have a feeling that there are people watching this who needed that word. I'd love to know for families who are walking through this now, maybe it's new for them. You have said before that advocacy begins at home. You kind of gave a little bit of an example around like researching grants, which in and of itself is insightful. How can families get started? Like, what's the first step if they're facing this and the mounting bills? I can't even imagine. Because I think TJ's NICU stay was, I don't know, it was like $1.5 million or something. We didn't have $1.5 million just sitting, in the sock drawer. So how would a new family get started? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, when it comes to advocacy with finances, I can get to that when we talk a little bit about the platform that's been built. But when it comes to advocacy, like for your child, I think one of the best things I was told was ask a lot of questions. And if they're frustrated with you asking the questions, find another provider. Because I have to be, I am an expert in my son. I know my son better than any physician. I know my son better than any therapist, but I don't know all the technical stuff that they know. And so me becoming educated when it came to my son was very important because I didn't know what I could ask. For example, I didn't know there were choices of wheelchairs. I was just told this is the wheelchair you're going to use because this is the provider we use at this hospital. I didn't understand that. It was years into the journey that I was like, wait a minute, I have a choice and there's a better solution for my son. So asking other parents that have been there, was like the second biggest part of advocacy. I found out parents were doing treatments, therapies, finding equipment that were way beyond my knowledge base or anything I found on the internet, because they had been there a little bit longer and they had pushed that envelope a little farther and they had created a way. I mean, there's been entire therapy treatment things that have developed since my son's accident. So when I come across a family that's had a near drowning or a TBI or honestly any kind of diagnosis, I feel like I'm able to encourage them with some resources that I didn't know about back then. And so asking another parent are the two biggest things with advocacy. I think you could start asking good questions and asking another parent what they would be doing if they were in that position today.
Hey, listen, I'm inserting myself in this conversation for just a minute because if you're enjoying this conversation and if you enjoy the many conversations that I host through my podcast, I want to invite you to join me for my free virtual masterclass, How to Bounce Back Better. My mission in life is to help you and people like you discover the power within you to not just go through stuff, not just survive, but I want you to learn how to grow through stuff, how to thrive. How to Bounce Back Better is an hour-long virtual masterclass, and I offer multiple sessions every single week. If you want to register, all you have to do is head over to nonajones.com, and you will see a big link, a big button that says free masterclass. Just click the button, and you can sign up today. I want to see you in the next masterclass because I promise you there are tools, tactics, strategies, and tips that have helped me build resilience that I want to give to you. So again, head over to nonajones.com to click the big free masterclass button and get signed up today. All right, now back to the conversation. So we're going to get into Connect platform and SupportNow.org. But before we do that, I find in conversations like this, they tend to be focused on one of two things. The first is the well-being of the child, which is rightfully so. Like, we need to make sure that the child is taken care of. The second does tend to be financials, like making sure that the bills can get paid, that there's resources available. But rarely do I hear conversations about the mental and emotional well-being of the parents, of the caregivers. I would love for you to just take a moment, if you don't mind, to talk about maybe how you were able to protect your mental and emotional well-being, you and your husband, you and your family. Like, if there were tools that you used or resources that you use that you can just offer to parents going through this, because I can't imagine the strain, because it's not something that ends. Like, there's not like a time where it's like, okay, it's 5:00, now we're good. How do you protect your mental and emotional well-being while trying to care for your child and take care of the bills and get all of the resources?
Yeah. So for the first 3 years, I did a really bad job. Like, I was a hot mess. Now, I was everywhere because so I went from being like the PTO mom that was running everything, the volunteer everywhere, to having to take my son to therapies every day of the week, multiple times a day, make sure he's breathing okay, make sure he's eating enough, make sure he's alive. And it was high stress. Like, but I wanted to still be everyone to everybody. Yeah. And I couldn't. And so I tried. And then around year 3, matter of fact, it was year 3, my husband asked me he's like, I want you to preach on Sunday. Would you do that? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I went away for a weekend. It was probably one of the first times I went away because I was like, I need to get my mind right. I can't focus at home. There's too much going on. And so I went just for like 24 hours away. And I realized I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And it was subtle for me because I had never struggled emotionally, at least not to my understanding, emotionally in the past. I had healthy children. I had gone through things, but got through them. Like, I felt like I had never been up against something like this, that it wasn't like the movies where the accident happens and then they wake up and everything's fine and you get back to it. Our entire life had changed. Everything had changed. And it was stressful all the time. And so after several years, I was like, I don't think I'm okay. And so I was like, I think I should go to counseling. Like, that was a hard concept for me because to me that I grew up in the South. You just like, people be quiet. You don't say nothing about that. You keep it to yourself. And I just got tired of not being okay and trying to keep it. I just felt like I was always on edge. And so I went to a counselor and I did what they call, I found a counselor that does EMDR. So they specialize in trauma therapy. And it was a game changer. I mean, it just gave me the tools I needed to deal with all the feelings, all the trauma, all the things, and actually start to integrate them into the past, because I was living in that constant state of fight or flight every day. Because when you go through trauma, your fight or flight is like super high all the time. And so the reason it stays high is it stays in your short-term memory, and you need it to get in that long-term memory, but it just sticks there. So that's why, you know, people have things happen to them when they're kids, and something, they smell something or they see something and boom, they're right back there. Same thing. I'd walk by a pool, and I mean, to this day, I say pool and my stomach just clenched a little. And I still take my kids to the pool. We do, Wyatt loves aquatic therapy. We do all kinds of things, but I have to, if I want to live a healthier, better life, I had to get that counseling. And then I have to say community was my lifeline, my church family, having friends that were okay with me not being okay, like just crying, being a mess, not being put together, like, you know, having my hair in a messy bun and still having friends be like, hey, we see you. Can we come over and have coffee? Can we hang out? Can we bring our kids to you? When it wasn't easy for me to get my kids to other people at the time, that was a really, the community was sacred to me. And if you don't have that, if you're in this season and you don't have community, I just want to encourage you to like find a church family or find a group of women or find someone that will you can meet with even once a week, once a month, and just spend a little bit of time with, because it does really, truly make a difference.
And I think this is helpful because for those of us who are watching and listening to this, and perhaps this isn't something that affects your child, but you know someone who is in this situation, I think it gives you license to proactively provide that community. Like you said, your friend saying, hey, let me come over and bring some coffee, or hey, why don't I bring the kids to your house for a play date, instead of expecting you to try to wrangle everybody together, and that's just adding to your plate. I think that we have to be more sensitive to that. I'd love to talk about Connect platform, and we'll get to supportnow.org in one moment, but how did Connect platform come to be? And I would love to know, what are some of the needs that you see from families that are most prevalent?
Yeah. So Connect is it makes me happy. It is the largest database of grants in the world. At least I haven't found anything to contradict that statement. That is living and breathing, because we have a team of people that are constantly reviewing these grants, saying, are they open? Are they accepting applications? Has any criteria changed? Because as a mother, I started on this journey of finding grants, and I quickly found broken links, outdated applications, and it was frustrating. And if I didn't have that bulldog mentality, I would have quit. And so not everybody, especially depending on where you were. And this was, we were several months into the journey before I ever was able to look for grants or anything like that. And so we wanted to make it easier for families to get the resources they need. Some of these things children need, they need them then. They don't need them when insurance finally says yes, or the parent has worked 3 years to go save up enough money. They need them then. And there are foundations and organizations that have been there, done that. They've been in your shoes, or they saw a need and they created something for you, and people just don't know about them. And so what we did was gather those resources, and we're gathering them every single day, and we put them in the Connect platform. So now you can search by location, diagnosis or situation, and need. Need being equipment, respite, therapy, treatments, financial support, camps, bereavement support, counseling. All of that is sortable. And then you can find the grant based on based on this diagnosis, where I live and my need, I now know these grants I can apply for.
So tell me how that connects with supportnow.org, because I'd love to make sure people are aware of both.
Yeah. So I was, being Advocacy Abby on social media, I was sharing grants with families and just sharing the tips that I had. And I met the founders of supportnow.org. So SupportNow is an all-in-one platform. Think of GoFundMe, Meal Train, carrying bridge all in one, except people keep more of the money. Meal train, carrying bridge, the updates area is all free. And it makes it easier, it lifts a load of burden off families. So it's an all-in-one platform. And when I met them, they said, hey, we see this gap sometimes that, let's say you have a large fundraising goal or an accident happened or something's going on with your family and your community rallies and they raise support, but there's sometimes this gap. We see grants coming into that gap. Do you think you could help with that? And I said, absolutely, I can help with that. I have this amazing spreadsheet. And then the CTO was like, I think we could do something a little better. And so we came together and created the Connect platform. So the goal is to bridge that gap for families. So if the community can't do that part, they can also find grants for that. And so that's how I met them. And then I actually was teaching families how to fundraise or find grants for different items like wheelchair accessible vans, therapy stays, treatments. I have one lady I'm working with in Texas that's doing the first ever gene therapy treatment for her daughter. And all of this costs a lot of money. And so when I saw their platform allowed families to keep more of the money, because they have a roundup method. So families, when they donate, the person donating can round up and 100% of the intended donation goes to the family. It just made sense for me to use it. So I started using their platform. And then in December, they said, hey, we love what you're doing. We want you to help more families. Could you come on full time as our director of family advocacy? So yeah, absolutely. And so we've been since this year, just cranking away, helping hundreds and thousands of families.
First of all, this is like a match made in heaven. I think you are quite literally the mold when it comes to the perfect person for that role. So congratulations on that. I would love for you, let's just say there's a family listening or a family watching and they're like, okay, this definitely sounds like something I need. Can you just kind of walk through, okay, you know you need it. Now what do you do?
Yeah. So first, if you're just getting a diagnosis or you have a major life moment or a large need, I'd start a SupportNow registry. It's an easy way, especially if you just if you're a friend listening and your friend had an accident or they're at the hospital or they had preterm labor and they need a lot of support. They need their community to know what's going on. I would start a SupportNow registry. However, if you've been on this journey a while and you're like, I need to get access to we need a wheelchair accessible van. That's something I deal with all the time. I would set up a one-on-one meeting. Now you can always just start the registry and get to me another way, but I do one-on-one consultations with families for free. And everything I've mentioned is all free, by the way. And so we do one-on-one consultations. We make a plan of action. I help them find the grants in the Connect platform that will help them and then show them how to effectively fundraise and share with their community what's going on in a really transparent way.
So this feels incredibly easy. It feels incredibly user designed. And I want to encourage everybody, and we'll make sure that we also put all the links in the show notes. And so you'll be able to access them really, really easily. But please, please, please take advantage of these resources. I think one of the most beautiful outcomes of this entire situation, Abby, is that God impressed upon you He impressed upon you the need to build something for yourself that is now serving families that you will never meet. Mm-hmm. You'll never meet them, but you're changing their lives. And so that's just incredibly impactful. I'd love to know from your perspective, since you've been in this for so long now, what do you believe healthcare systems get wrong when it comes to working with families who are navigating all the complexities that this type of a situation creates?
Oh man. So just to give you perspective, to raise a child that's neurotypical and healthy on average cost from birth to 18 is about $240,000. This is from the Department of Agriculture. To raise a child with a diagnosis or disability on average is $1.4 million. There is a big gap there. So I have families constantly coming to me like, I've never done a fundraiser. I'm always giving. I'm like, yeah, there's a season and time for everything. And you're going to be able to give again. But right now you need to allow people the honor and the blessing of giving to you. And B, they got to stop looking at just the numbers. Somebody might look really good on their 1040, but they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on their child. And they could be, what do we call it? Cash poor. Like they could be broke. And so a lot of times like Medicaid waivers and different programs will say, oh, if you make over this amount, they're not considering you might have 5 kids. 3 of which are teenagers and eat you out of the house. You might have had to pay, you might not have had a Medicaid waiver for the first 30 days. I have a family I'm working with now. They didn't have their child on Medicaid for 30 days. They have an $800,000 bill. That is not reasonable to put on families. And so if we can do more, so first, we need to be at Congress and, within the U.S., Congress and fighting for these people to be seen. But even faster would be more and more foundations do something. When you see a need, fill a need. If you have an ability to give to one of these great organizations, do it, because they are truly changing the lives of families. I have been able to take my son to hyperbaric oxygen therapy, stem cell treatment, get an accessible van. All of this was done through grants and fundraising from my community and from organizations that said, we're going to be the difference until there is a difference. And so just to encourage, those listening that can make a change, I just step into it, because you'll never regret helping someone.
Absolutely. Well, we're at time, and I feel like this is a conversation that's going to require a part 2, because there's just so much depth here. I want to kind of wrap this up. I'm thinking of the mother and the father who are just feeling overwhelmed by the darkness, what feels like just a never ending dark tunnel that they're in. You have walked this journey, and I think that you are proof that while it is painful, it can also be redemptive. And I would love for you just to share anything that you're kind of holding on to that's giving you hope these days, because you're still caring for your son. So I would love for you to share anything that's giving you hope as you continue to walk this journey.
Yeah. So when we first got our diagnosis, when we were at the hospital, I remember every physician that came in, especially the new ones that were being trained on how to tell families this kind of information, would be very discouraging on purpose, because they didn't want you to get your, quote, hopes up. But my experience has been hope has never taken from anybody. It's only given them the energy, the faith, the hope, the joy to take one step more when you feel like it's all caving in. And so, I mean, if you're going through this and you feel like you're in a dark place, please let me remind you that the darkness will lift. Even the most chosen, not the most chosen, that's not the right word. Even those highly favored by God were in the darkest times. King David I would read scripture, and I would read the Psalms a lot during this time, because so many different people were in the darkest times, and God they were allowed to be there, but he did not leave them there. All right. And there was a season and a purpose for everything. I know that thousands and thousands of people have had their lives changed, and I won't even know all of them. And maybe in one day in heaven, God will show me, but have had their lives changed as a result of what my son has gone through. But I never would have chosen it. And I know that God has a perfect plan in it. And so when you feel like it won't get any better, please just let me encourage whoever is listening. It will, the sun will rise. It just might take a while. And so the thing I've seen that's been the game changer between families that seem like it's never getting lighter is just lifting your praise to the Lord. You can praise him whether you're in the darkness, and you can be honest. He's big and mighty, and he can handle it. He can handle the anger, the frustration, the questioning, the doubt, all of that. But if you keep going to them, he keeps filling your cup. You will once again be standing and breathing and walking forward.
Gosh, Abby, this is such a breath of fresh air. For me, for everyone who's watching, who's listening, I just thank you for your work. I thank you for your advocacy. I thank you for the love that you not only show to your son and your family, but to the families that you are serving. And it's interesting that you referenced Psalms, because I want to leave everybody with a psalm to meditate on this week. It's Psalm 34, verse 18, which says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I think what you said is so appropriate. It doesn't matter how dark it feels, how lonely you may feel. God is with you. He is near you. He loves you. He sees you. And your story matters. Your child's life matters. And I'm so, so grateful that you now have access to these resources, because hopefully you will realize that you are not alone. If this conversation ministered to you in some way, if you found it insightful, I would highly encourage you to please share it with a family member, friend, or colleague who needs to hear this message. And until next time, I want you to continue to walk in the knowledge that you are loved by God and by me. Have a great day. Hey friend, thank you so much for listening and maybe even watching this episode of the Nona Jones Show. If you enjoyed this conversation, I want to encourage you to become a member of my Patreon community. You see, on Patreon, you're not only going to get full-length episodes of my podcast, but you will also get early access to any new content that I share, including new podcast episodes, sermons, even behind-the-scenes clips of my travels. And depending on the tier at which you join, you will also be invited to some live Q&A conversations that I have with my Patreon community. So what I want you to do is head over to patreon.com/Nona Not Nora to get signed up today. I want to see you in my community. Thanks for being here.